Hey, thanks for tuning in to Twang and Bang. Fans of the channel know that these are the kinds of guns that I'm typically shooting. Guns that go off pretty much the instant that I pull the trigger, which was definitely not the case with that musket and that Fowler that you saw in that slow motion footage at the beginning of the video. It seemed like forever for them to go off. I would pull the trigger, the flint would hit the steel would spark, which would then ignite the powder that's in the pan, which would then have to burn through the flash hole, which would then ignite the powder that's in the barrel. And that would kind of gently push the bullet out of a very long barrel. It seemed like forever from when I pulled that trigger to when I saw a hole in the paper downrange. The only reason I had a chance to do that was because when I was planning a trip to Colonial Williamsburg for my family, I found out that they have a brand new musket range, one where anyone age 14 and up can go and get instruction and shoot real deal, authentic Colonial muskets and Fowlers. There's a whole lot more to Colonial Williamsburg for a gun enthusiast like myself. I was able to also get some footage of them forging a barrel in their gun shop, as well as get a really good history of those firearms and their importance to the colonial militia as well as American Revolution. And that's what's coming up next on Twang and Bang. Colonial Williamsburg has always maintained an armory of historically accurate, fully functioning muskets and Fowlers for use in daily demonstrations of the arms. 2016 saw the introduction of a 25-yard range where anyone 14 and up can shoot them for themselves under the guidance of NRA-certified instructors. Though the musket range is meant for regular folk, a few celebrities have come to try their hands at the flintlocks, including Jack and Ozzy Osbourne and CMT's Allison DeMarcus. Though I'm not nearly that famous, I did see a blank shell and a marker on the table while I was setting up. That said, it was the rows of authentic muskets and Fowlers that really caught my eye, and I was about to learn why they are the two guns found here on the Colonial Williamsburg range.
So what I'm holding right here is the British short land pattern musket. It's a 75 caliber. We're shooting a 69 caliber ball through it. Everything about this gun is built very thick, built very rugged. The stock was walnut. This big thick wrist right here, this part between the lock and the butt, and this big brass butt plate right here was to make it as much of a hand-to-hand combatant weapon as a firearm. And this bayonet on the end is definitely the business end. It's triangular shaped. They added that extra ridge. Initially they were flat. That extra ridge gives it stability so that it doesn't bend or break when being used. It is attached to the end, and there you have your arm. Was not built for accuracy in any stretch of the imagination. It's a smooth bore, which means it's as smooth on the inside as it is on the outside. Like I said, we're shooting an undersized ball out of it, so there's a lot of room for that ball to wiggle and bounce on the way out. And if it bounces off the left side of this barrel, it's going to zing to the right. The purpose for that undersized ball was to get it loaded and firing as quick as you possibly can. You're basically turning your army into one big shotgun. You're firing a wall of lead at one direction at the enemy who's standing in a line as wide or wider as your army. British standard at the time was 15 shots in 3 3/4 minutes. That means that you could fire one roughly every 15 seconds consistently. If you could do one in 15 and then another in 20 and then another in 35, you were no good to them. You needed to do one every 15 seconds consistently. And that was their standard. That wasn't even the accelerated or the veteran status. That was just until you were no longer the awkward squad. Think of this as like pretty much the Toyota Camry of firearms. Everybody's got one, but it's the least celebrated firearm. It's called the Fowler, fowling piece or birding gun. Just like the musket, it's also smooth bore, mainly used to fire shot. There's no rifling on the inside, but that made it very versatile. So you could engage smaller animals, smaller critters. It was your pest control gun. About 90% of the population at the time were farmers, agriculturalists, so you needed something for pest control on your farm. At the same time, you could put the little pest on your table to eat. So instead of winging that with a 54 caliber ball from a rifle and hitting a rabbit and completely decimating the poor little guy, you can hit it with shot and take it home and feed your family with it. The only military use for this one would have been militia use. If you were aged 16 to 60, you would be required to be a member of the militia if you were a free man. That means that you would have to muster a certain amount of times, depending on your colony, is how many times they made you meet a year. That meant that you trained in military tactics, and you would be the first response force for whatever was a threat to your colony, be it an uprising of some kind, foreign invasion, or a revolt. The militia was there to dispatch, and if needed, they would rout regular troops from a nearby fort or the parent country if need be. You would, by law, have to have a firearm, a certain amount of powder, and a certain amount of lead on hand to make your own ammunition, and a bladed weapon of some kind. That way you wouldn't have to smack somebody with your fowler. As you can tell, it's not built for that. It's not built as thick or as rugged as the musket.
That was a very interesting lesson on why the British short-land pattern musket and the fowler were common in 18th century Williamsburg, and the history of militias during the birth of our country was especially poignant. However, this is a real gun range, and these are real firearms that are available for visitors to shoot. Jim is an NRA certified muzzleloading firearms instructor, and he's going to take me through the steps I need to know to put lead to paper. First up is the .75 caliber Brown Bess.
My name's Jim.
Hey, Cameron.
Nice to meet you. Pleasure to have you here at the range today.
This is really cool. I'm really excited about this.
Excellent. Well, what we're going to do first, I'm going to go over the procedure we're going to use to load and fire the guns. Part of it I do, part of it you do.
Okay.
It's the same for both of the guns that you're going to shoot today. And the first one you're going to shoot is going to be the .75 caliber musket. This is what was commonly referred to slang terms as a Brown Bess.
That is a huge bore. That is crazy.
3/4 of an inch across. Now the round that you're going to be firing out of it is a .69 caliber ball. We're going to load it out of one of these cartridges. That's the ball. If you want to feel the size of it, there's 70 grains of powder inside the cartridge.
And this is like ripped out of a book, right? Just you use
it's using print paper from our print shop. And we cut it to size, and then we roll and fill all these cartridges ourselves here at the range. I'm going to load the barrel for you. So what we have here is our cartridge. You can see the gunpowder down in the cartridge.
Right, right.
You can see the ball at the end of the cartridge.
Yeah.
Okay. What I've done is I've left that paper around the ball. It acts as a patch. Wadding, seat it. Now this is where your part comes in, where you reach up here, pull back one click. Excellent. This is the same 2F powder that's in the barrel. You want to pour that right into the pan and spread it out across that. There we go. Now you want to reach up and shut that with 2 or 3 fingers. Watch your thumb. Okay. You're going to pull back to full cock. Take off your leather stall. Now you're ready to go. Index your finger on the side of the trigger.
Oh my gosh. That is quite the lock time.
Now, do you see where you hit?
Is that at the top of the target? Or no, that's a...
Down at the bottom. See that bottom row of tape?
Oh, the bottom. Oh, way low left.
Down there. Yep.
That was the lock time. Totally got me. I was bracing for recoil, which didn't happen anyway.
We ready to go again?
Yes, sir. We'll do better this time around. The time between when the trigger is pulled and when the bullet is propelled out of the barrel is called the lock time. And with the Brown Bess, the lock time is longer than the time between trigger pulls when I'm shooting a semi-automatic rifle rapid fire. My brain would go into identify the malfunction mode before the shot would go off. And that resulted in some really bad marksmanship at first, though I still had fun with every pull of the trigger. After getting used to the lock time and 8-pound trigger pull on the Brown Bess, I'm handed the Fowler, which is a much more common firearm owned by a militia member. They look similar, but they have very different feels in hand.
This gun is called the Fowler or birding gun. It's somewhere around a pound and a half lighter than the other gun. The trigger pull is going to be about half what the other gun is.
Okay.
It's not loaded yet, but if you want to get a feel for it, put it up to your shoulder.
Oh my gosh.
You'll notice a weight difference. A much nicer front sight. You aim it like a
I'm holding
shotgun.
a stick.
Yeah.
It's so narrow.
Very nice gun. This is usually what people prefer to shoot. So, this gun is a 62 caliber barrel shooting a 58 caliber ball.
Okay.
So less of a size difference between the ball and barrel. 50 grains of powder. We're still getting somewhere around 900 feet per second. We calibrated and chronographed the rounds prior to opening to the public. We decided on 50 grains for this one. A little bit tighter fit, so I take off a lot of the paper. Wooden ramrod, so we have to kind of work it down
So you don't break
easier,
it.
yeah. Everything else procedure-wise is the same, it's just smaller.
Right
I think
underneath it.
You hit
Yep.
that middle bottle on the bottom right corner.
Yep.
Good job.
So that was about 7 inches low from where I was aiming.
And again, it's still a smooth bore,
Yep.
so you're still getting a little wiggle room out of it.
And but the lock time is a little faster, it seems, on this.
If you look at the vent hole, it's actually a two-piece vent hole. On the inside, that lighter colored piece is actually coned shaped on the inside. So there's less space for that powder, that heat to have to burn through. So it'll actually go off a little bit quicker than the musket does.
Glad I'm not wrong, because it definitely seemed like a shorter lock time.
It was. A lot of people don't pick that up because, like I said, we get a lot of people that don't have any experience at all with firearms and guns out here.
But they shoot better than I do.
Not necessarily better than you, but they don't have any bad habits. They don't have any expectations of how quick that lock is supposed, how quick the gun's supposed to go off.
With its better balance, lighter trigger, and shorter lock time, I quickly found a consistent point of impact with the Fowler. I can see why it was so popular with colonists, even though it was a lighter caliber than the Brown Bess.
Excellent. Bottom of the bottle.
Yay!
Center, bottom of the bottle.
Okay, so for the record, my last 3 shots hit the bottle that I was aiming for. That's not necessarily what my point of aim was, but I hit what I intended to hit. It only took 2.5 days of instruction and a lot of paper targets.
This is our 700th round.
Yeah, wow.
It was more like 10 shots total between the two flintlocks to get used to how they feel at the shot. After that, I had a much easier time getting my rounds right where I wanted them, as you can see by this fresh target. I started out rough, but at least I am trainable, and Jim was a patient instructor.
Center barrel again.
Gotta be, yeah, right at the bottom of the bottle, right where it touches the white.
Yeah,
There's a new hole
that
right there.
one, it was just the gun starting to wander more, but that wasn't my trigger pull. That was the...
That's the gun. All right.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate. I don't care about that.
It was a pleasure.
This was so much fun.
Springing.
And with that, I earned my way onto a shell on the range. I can only imagine the looks on people's faces when they notice twang and bang tacked on that canopy support, but there it is for all to see.
That's fun. That is so awesome.
The range wasn't the only thing drawing me to Colonial Williamsburg. They also have maybe the only true Colonial gun shop in existence, where you can see journeyman gunsmiths make Colonial firearms exactly the same way as they were made 240 years ago. What part of the process you get to see will vary from day to day, but I'm lucky enough to catch them at a time where they'll be taking a bent piece of iron like this and welding it with hammer blows into the basis of a barrel like this.
The smith part of gunsmithing is shaping metal by hammering. So if it's a black metal part of the gun, all the black metal parts of the gun are shaped by smithing. The word smith comes from an Old English word to smite, to hit. So smith tells you that the primary metal that goes in the making of a gun is iron. But a gunsmith is a product-specific trade. You have to be able to work all the raw materials necessary to make a gun, and just so you can do repair work. Have you ever heard the phrase lock, stock, and barrel? That's a literal truth in here. You have to be able to make the whole gun lock, stock, and barrel. So the other smiths in town are material-specific trades. They tell you what they hit. Black, silver, tin are material-specific trades. They make lots of things out of that one material. Gunsmith uses different materials to make one thing. But the gun barrel starts as a flat bar of iron. This one's been cupped into a U shape and tapered in thickness. And a rifle barrel is not parallel sided on the outside. It's heaviest at the breech. Tapers to a distance here. The distance here is the location of the hind sight on a rifle barrel. There's two sights on a rifle, a foresight and a hindsight. Can you see the flare in the muzzle where it gets bigger here? Well, this thickness is the same as here, so that the sights stay in the same plane. There's a thinner section in between the sights. The purpose of that thinner section in between the sights is to save weight. So the gun's not too heavy out front. It balances where your forward hand goes. In period documents, they call that squared, tapered, and flared. And Virginia barrels are mostly straight in between the sights. So the result is going to be, in some cases, a heavier rifle with a thicker, more rigid barrel. And if the barrel whips too much when the bullet passes through, it affects accuracy. So if you can make the barrel thicker, you make it inherently more accurate, reducing whip.
Do you want a mandrel in there?
I probably will, because I want to make sure we don't get too small a hole. Let me pinch it first.
Pinch it in the middle, bring it together. This isn't the weld yet.
We're just getting them touching. All right, go ahead and throw that in there. All right, pull it back a little. All right, see if you can get the tip in there. Okay, perfect. Good. Okay.
Pull it.
Yep. Now there's what we've done. We've pinched up those edges. Don't touch that end, it's probably hot. But we pinch those edges together. This edge and this edge will butt up together. The next thing we'll do is make sure that's real clean, flux it, and bring it up to welding temperature.
As Richard explained, Colonial gunsmiths had to be proficient at many different skills, including how to properly stoke a fire. Richard and Eric spent as much time preparing the coal fire for welding the barrel as they did actually performing the welding. Virginia bituminous coal has to be coked first before being pushed into the hottest part of the fire. All the while, the gunsmith must monitor the flame for signs of impurities that can rapidly burn holes through their material. The weld is made by hammering the two sides of the material together over a mandrel. Richard welded about an inch at a time, with Eric ensuring that the mandrel was properly fitted into the barrel each pass. After about an hour of work total, the barrel had about 5 inches of weld.
Good weld. I'm gonna brush this and bring it over there so you get a view of it.
I'm gonna go relieve rope.
Yeah, okay. Fire's about shot, so good place to stop before we burn something or cause some irreparable damage to what's going to be a good barrel. Let's see, I'll put it on there. That's a scale forming already as it's cooling off, but that much of it's welded.
Wow. That's so cool.
It is. It's one of the. I'll weld a barrel anytime, so it's fun to weld a barrel. It's not fun reaming it out.
Yeah.
But it's fun welding.
But in order to get a consistent bore in that barrel, it needs to be reamed anyway, and this is how it's done. The bits on the wall are attached to the spindle of a large flywheel, often made from a repurposed coach wheel. The flywheel is cranked to a steady speed, then the barrel is pushed onto the rotating reamer.
And you get it up to speed, and then you push that gun barrel onto the bit. So all this flywheel does is provide momentum, hopefully smoothing the turning of the bit. And then these series of spokes here are used as a fulcrum. So to advance the barrel onto the bit, you put the hook on the carriage and lean against it. So you'd like to see about a 1/16 of an inch movement in the carriage for every revolution.
Oh, okay.
So you're gauging, you're gauging the weight of your pressure based on that. So I know that's what'll cut efficiently. So then I make a mark on here because it's unbelievably psychological, if you're cranking that in, needing to see this moving. So I'll put a chalk mark here, and you want to see the carriage, moving up to here. And then when you make another chalk mark and back it off, I make a long mark where the tip of the bit is, so you can see how far you've gone. And then I do 10 right-handed, 10 left-handed, 10 two-handed, 10 one-handed, just so you have something to count, because it is no fun cranking the end of that reamer.
They build rifles in the shop, so the barrel must also be rifled on what is probably the coolest contraption in all of Colonial Williamsburg.
So this is our rifle saw. So by calling our gun a rifle, if you look through it, this is exactly what you're seeing. Yeah, all those spiral grooves on the inside, and this is the machine that puts those there. So it's pretty easy. There's just a steel cutter on the far end mounted on that wooden dowel. And all I do is grab this handle and walk it backwards. And as that cylinder comes through the guide here at the end, it's pinned to that cutter head and recreates the same exact groove that you see on just on the inside of the barrel. So it does one at a time, so you push it back forward, index it to the next groove, repeat the process. And we do a total of 7 grooves, and the rate of twist is determined by this. So we end up with a rate of twist of 1 to 56, meaning every 56 inches the ball travels, it's 1 full rotation. If it stops cutting at whatever depth we're working on, all we have to do is pop that blade out, put a paper shim underneath to raise it just a little bit more until we end up with that final depth that you saw in the barrel. So overall, it's about 5 hours of work, which in the grand scheme of things really isn't bad. It's probably the easiest job in the shop.
There are many, many other steps just to making a barrel, let alone all of the other parts fabricated and finished right here in the gun shop. In fact, every single piece of a rifle or pistol is forged or carved in this building. Believe it or not, the gun shop is making these rifles for public sale, though every gun is pre-ordered well in advance of delivery. Most of the guns in colonial times were owned by the colonists themselves for use in hunting, pest control, and self-defense. Additional firearms and equipment dedicated to militia use were stored in this very magazine, one of the many original buildings preserved here in Colonial Williamsburg. It also turned out to be a great place to learn more about the history of the militia and the firearms of the American Revolution.
Basically, the building that you're in right now is an original building dating to 1715. It's built to house and store all the weapons, arms, equipment, and supplies that are going to be used by the military here in Virginia. It's generally going to be organized by weight. You have your heavy things on the bottom floor, so things like the cannon, as you see right here, mortar, gunpowder, all of the heavy equipment, heavy supplies be downstairs on that bottom floor. This floor is going to house all the weapons and arms as you see around, all around. So all the pole arms, swords, firearms, all those weapons type stuff. Everything at the top floor would be the light things. So if you look on the back wall across the way on the shelving, you can see that there are very light things that would be stored on the top floor. Things like tents, blankets, uniforms, canteens, cartridge boxes, bayonet scabbards, drums, knapsacks, haversacks, cooking equipment, and all kinds of other light things that the Army would then use for anything would be stored on that top floor. Up until the American Revolution, there is no standing army here in Virginia. We rely on what's called the militia, which is every able-bodied man in the colony between the ages of 16 and 60 that are required to own their own firearm. But most common that you would see would be something like this. This is a fowling piece. So this is probably the most common firearm you're going to see here in the colonies anywhere. This is basically like a shotgun, being loaded with shot, used mainly by small farmers for hunting and also for controlling of pests that are trying to eat their crops. So this is what they're probably going to have. But the militia are required to own a firearm of some type, 3 pounds of powder, 1 pound of shot, and an edged weapon of some type. Generally either an axe, sword, knife, anything that can cut. You can use it not only as a close combat weapon, but also as a camp tool. So they're required to have those things, but they're going to have them at their own homes, because when the militia is going to be called out, it's relatively fast. You will need some people that can quickly get all their equipment and supplies and head out to wherever they're being mustered. Now, if we need to form an actual military unit that's going to be on location, or it's going to go to serve somewhere for quite some time, that's where all the stuff that's in the building, that's where all this stuff is stored here for. So if we decide to raise a regiment or even a company, they're going to draw supplies and things from this building. It'll be sent to wherever they're being formed. They're going to use it, equipment, supplies, uniforms, everything. And once they're done and disbanded, all the things that they use and still survive after their encounters and usage will then be brought back to this building and stored for any kind of future use. So that's why all this stuff here is basically just a big, large warehouse and storehouse. On the whole, majority of the weapons here in the building are of this type. This is the British short land pattern infantry musket. This is the most common weapon being used by both the British forces during the American Revolution and the Americans. Now the British, this is their standard service musket, so they're going to be getting them and manufacturing them over in England and bringing them with them. Whereas when we start the American Revolution, what we're using is stuff that's stored in buildings like this, and also the next best thing is that we're capturing them and stealing them whenever we can to use them, because they're service muskets that are built to be used by infantry and by soldiers. This weapon right here is a rifle. So when we talk about rifles, almost all the weapons in this building are smoothbore muskets, which means they're completely smooth on the inside of the barrel, which does not allow you to have much accuracy, especially if you're shooting a solid projectile. Now, that's where rifling comes in. The rifling was originally invented in Germany in around the 1400s, so it's been around for quite some time. But it's being used mainly as a civilian weapon that's being used as a hunting, or just a, best way to put it is to show you is this one right here. This is basically a civilian rifle. So being used mainly by those hunters out on the frontier. However, for the most part, a rifle is not very useful on the battlefield, because we're firing in those volleys, we're firing by command, and it's also much slower to load. It takes about 1 minute to 2 minutes to reload. However, that old saying, that old thinking that always comes by, at least with our history, is that the reason that we won the war was because the British stood in those stupid lines and fired inaccurate weapons while we stood behind rocks and trees and fired rifles, which is also very inaccurate. We did the same exact thing. We stood in those lines and fired inaccurate muskets back and forth. And the rifles, while they were being used by the Americans, mainly in a peripheral role as skirmishers and such, we always still think that the British were too stupid to not have rifles. This weapon proves it wrong. This is actually a pattern 1776 British rifle that's being used by the British light infantry. So it looks just like, if you ever look at any German Jaeger rifles, which Jaeger is German for hunter, right. The shorter rifles, they're being used by those light infantry companies as well. So, but the thing is though, is that a light infantry company has 100 men, there might be only 15 or 20 of these rifles in the entire company. So they're only being issued to those specific troops. But it is showing that the British are adapting their tactics. They're not just standing in those long lines of men, and they're not standing in those rigid formations all the time. They are adapting to what we call the light infantry tactics. So that's something I really like to point out and show, that, you know, it's not just Americans using rifles. Everyone is using them. They're just not as prevalent as we think of today.
Now, there are some differences in how this is designed. What are those differences?
My favorite part of the entire weapon is that you will not lose the ramrod. It's connected to the end of the barrel. Yeah. So that way it allows you to load. Also, it speeds up the loading process a little bit, as when you pull it out,
it automatically aligns both directions.
Now the thing is though, it is a lot of stress that you put on this. So there have been reports of in the battlefield finding these pieces all over the place because they break them off really easily.
The Colonial Williamsburg magazine displays a mixture of historic pieces as well as modern, authentically crafted reproductions. The Governor's Palace has an even larger collection, but you'll just have to see it for yourself to appreciate. Keep in mind, though, that the whole place is a living museum with something of interest for everyone, even if you're not a gun enthusiast like me.
And on that note, our first stop was actually at the dress shop, where we spent about an hour watching our daughter get fitted with that pair of dress she was wearing at the gun shop. Yes, that was my 12-year-old daughter also known here on the channel as Cuter Shooter. And she wore that everywhere we went at Colonial Williamsburg, except for the day that it was raining, because we didn't want it to get messed up. But even though we were there for 5 days, there's so much that we didn't get to. Every day they're featuring different historic trades. They've got dozens of historic recreations throughout the whole week, including holding an election for public office, including holding a very authentic, very intense witch trial that we absolutely loved. And the interpreters are really big on audience participation, and that's something that we really enjoy as a family as well. Basically, Colonial Williamsburg isn't just good at putting history on display, they're really good at making you feel like you're a part of it. If you want to learn more about Colonial Williamsburg or the gun range in particular, be sure to click the link in the video description below or visit my website at twangandbang.net. Be sure to follow me on Instagram and Facebook. You can see the links right here, and be sure to click right here to subscribe so you can catch my next videos on bows, guns, and other cool stuff. I really appreciate you watching Twang and Bang, and I hope to see you next time.